Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Highest Power Church and State. This is Rick Pidcock, and I am coming to you from the beaches of Florida today. I'm on family vacation, and I wanted to come out here to the ocean because I have a particular thing I'd like to do for this episode. And that has to do with a man named John Piper. You have probably heard me talk a lot about John Piper over the years, especially in this past year. We've come to be aware of the fact that, like, Doug Wilson was platformed by John Piper. Doug Wilson is Pete Hegseth's spiritual mentor. And the men of Cities Church in Minneapolis, who one of the pastors is a director for ICE, were trained by John Piper. Also Andy Naselli, he did the prayer that God would break the teeth of the people in Minneapolis. He was trained by John Piper. He works for John Piper, or has worked for John Piper, teaching at a seminary. And the modern complementarian movement that has caused so much harm to women is a movement that was built in large part by John Piper. And so when we look at John Piper himself, he was really, he's been around for a while, but he really came on the scene to the level that he did in popularity, mostly as a result of a sermon he preached at One Day 2000, which was an event in Memphis, Tennessee, Shelby Farms, where 40,000 college students came and listened for the Passion Worship Conference, and he was one of the speakers there, and he gave this sermon that kind of really catapulted him. In fact, in my book, I share a number of quotes from Desiring God executives who credited this sermon for having influenced Piper's rise to, popularity and everything. And in fact, you may remember on episode 141 of Highest Power Church and State, when I interviewed Carrie Ladner, she even brought up the Seashells sermon and mentioned it. So it's one of those sermons that has kind of taken on it's a whole lore, basically. And it's what catapulted Piper to becoming as popular as he is. So in this sermon, he eventually gets around to talking about this elderly couple in Florida who are collecting seashells by the beach. And he says that's a tragedy. And so since I'm on vacation right now in Florida at the beach, I decided to return to the scene of the crime, so to speak. And given the harm that Piper has caused in the world over the past 26 years as a result of gaining popularity from this sermon about tragedy on the beaches of Florida, I would like to respond to Piper from the beaches of Florida. So I'm going to be playing a portion of his sermon that Desiring God has uploaded to their YouTube channel, and I'm going to be responding to different parts of it. So here's John Piper.
You don't have to know a lot of things in order to make a huge difference for the Lord in the world. But you do need to know a few things that are great and be willing to live for them and die for them. People that make a difference in the world are not people who have mastered a lot of things. They are people who have been mastered by a very few things that are very, very great.
He says people that make a difference in the world are people who have been mastered by a very few things that are very, very great. Now, when you're in your, 18 to 22-year-old range of your life, that's going to sound really good. It's going to sound very attractive. But if you really think about it, that's really just the language of hierarchy. He's talking about making a difference by being mastered. That's master and slavery language. He's talking about making a difference by being enslaved to a hierarchy. This is the fundamental way that Piper sees the world.
If you want your life to count, you don't have to have a high IQ and you don't have to have a high EQ. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to have good looks. You don't have to be from a good family or from a good school. You just have to know a few basic, simple, glorious, majestic, obvious, unchanging, eternal things, and be gripped by them and be willing to lay down your life for them, which is why anybody in this crowd can make a worldwide difference, because it isn't you. It's what you're gripped with.
He says, if you want your life to count. So basically, if you don't agree with John Piper's theology of being enslaved to this hierarchy, your life doesn't count. It's really, like, it makes sense when you're in that world that you want your life to count. But when you're outside of that theology, you start to see how inhumane it all is. I went to a wedding recently, and at the wedding, it was a pretty traditional Christian wedding. You know, they had the woman say things like, you know, she promises to obey the man, and they talked about here is the man and wife. They talked about Mr. and Mrs. and then gave the man's name. And they said that if you don't have this theology in your marriage, then your marriage is meaningless. So imagine how Ruth Ellen and I felt sitting there listening to this stuff. Like, our marriage is meaningless because we're not enslaved by this hierarchy. We're not mastered by this hierarchy of male authority and female submission. That doesn't make any sense.
But one of the really sad things about this moment right now is that there are hundreds of you in this crowd who do not want your life to make a difference. All you want is to be liked. Maybe finish school, get a good job, find a husband or a wife, a nice house, a nice car, good vacations, grow old healthy, have a fun retirement, die easy, no hell. And that's all you want. You don't give a rip whether your life counts on this earth for eternity. And that's a tragedy in the making. That is a tragedy in the making.
He says all you want is to be liked. But what's wrong with you wanting your kids to like you? What's wrong with wanting to have good relationships in life? He says it like it's a bad thing. That you want to be liked. Like, that's just a human thing. We want to have good relationships. My kid on this trip, my daughter said to me, she said, "I'm glad you're not one of those grumpy daddies." Like, if you define making a difference as enslavement to a hierarchy, you're going to make a difference in your kids' lives. But you're going to make a difference in a way that would be a tragedy, because it's going to cause a lot of trauma and wounds. Because you're concerned by mastering them, by breaking them, breaking their wills to your mastery of authority, of male authority. So then he goes to this story of these missionaries.
About 3 weeks ago, we got news at our church that Ruby Eliason and Laura Edwards were killed in Cameroon. Ruby Eliason, over 80, single all her life, a nurse, poured her life out for one thing: to make Jesus Christ known among the sick and the poor in the hardest and most unreached places. Laura Edwards, a medical doctor in the Twin Cities And then in retirement, partnering up with Ruby, also pushing 80, and going from village to village in Cameroon. And the brakes give way. Over a cliff they go, and they're dead instantly. And I asked my people, is this a tragedy? Two women in their 80s, almost. A whole life devoted to one idea, Jesus Christ magnified among the poor and the sick, in the hardest places. And 20 years after most of their American counterparts had begun to throw their lives away on trivialities in Florida and New Mexico, fly into eternity with a death in a moment. Is this a tragedy, I asked? It is not a tragedy.
He says, is this a tragedy? Now, of course, when I look at the story, I'm not going to say that their lives are a tragedy. But yes, two elderly women falling off of a cliff and dying, that's a tragic event. That's something that should be lamented, that should be mourned. And yet he's telling the story with a huge smile on his face and saying it's not a tragedy. There's no lament. There's no sorrow. There's none of that. It's just, this is great. And there's something deeply inhumane about that. And so then he contrasts their story with the story of this elderly couple at the beach.
I'll read you what a tragedy is. I've got a little article here from Reader's Digest. You don't read Reader's Digest, I know that. But there is a generation who does. This is a tragedy. Title of the article: Start Now, Retire Early. February 1998. Bob and Penny took early retirement from their jobs in the Northeast 5 years ago when he was 59 and she was 51. Now they live in Punta Gorda, Florida, where they cruise on their 30-foot trawler, play softball, and collect shells. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. And there are people in this country that are spending billions of dollars to get you to buy it. And I get 40 minutes to plead with you, don't buy it. With all my heart, I plead with you, don't buy that dream. The American dream. A nice house, a nice car, a nice job, a nice family, a nice retirement, collecting shells. As the last chapter, before you stand before the Creator of the universe to give an account with what you did. Here it is, Lord, my shell collection. Look, Lord, my shell collection. And I've got a good swing. And look at my boat. God, look at my boat, God. Well, not for Ruby and not for Laura. Don't waste your life. Don't waste it.
Notice when he says that they collect seashells, the crowd starts dying laughing. Like, how hilarious is it that this elderly couple is together, enjoying their lives on the beach? Like, heaven forbid they have a good relationship and they've provided for their family and they're enjoying creation. Like, somehow that's a tragedy. But when he mentions that they collect seashells, everyone dies laughing. What if they were neurodivergent? It doesn't seem to dawn on him that maybe that could be the case. You know, why might an elderly couple collect seashells? Neurodivergent people collect things because, for one, it helps with emotional regulation. They collect things that are really tools for helping to bring an inner calm. They collect things because it helps with sensory stimulation. Specific weights or colors or textures can be grounding for people. They collect things because they might have a hyper focus, or they learn by pursuing their interests, by going into deep dives, by having a specialized pursuit of knowledge. And maybe one of those things might be seashells. Also, it helps with pattern recognition, systematizing, organizing, cataloging. It gives them a sense of order and completion. The whole pattern recognition thing is how I'm able to notice parallels between the theology and ethics of Piper's glory hierarchy. He says God the Father is this way, and then he talks about living out your gospel, and there are patterns there. There are patterns of ego, of authority and submission, of making sure people are mastered by a highest power who satisfies his wrath and does everything for ego and glory, self-glory. Like, those are patterns between theology and ethics that are quite easy to spot. So what if this couple was neurodivergent? Or what if one of them was? And this is how they pursue those things. But Piper misses all of that because he's got his head stuck in making sure people are enslaved to a glory hierarchy of authority and submission, where satisfaction gets maximized by stroking the ego of the one with the highest power, and then cutting off everyone from their humanity in the service of God's ego trip. So what if instead, what if you considered the presence of God in and among all of us? What if we lived and moved and had our being in God? And what if that was very good? What if instead of dehumanizing hierarchies, what if we embraced wholeness and love? Maybe then we can make a difference in the world in a way that fosters wholeness rather than furthering the harm of hierarchy. So that's what I got for you today. I didn't want to pass the opportunity to discuss this sermon from the place where he supposedly thinks the tragedy took place. And, we can do better than what he has given us, than what the last 30 years have led to in our country, this theology-fueled pursuit of power. And so that's what we're here to discuss on Highest Power Church and State. And we'll be back with another episode to see what happened over the next few days on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.